Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, 2.5 weeks to go till polling day. Let's take stock of the campaign so far, look ahead to what's in store. Sam, Isabel, Steve are still with me. Sam, Mrs May's made a great thing about what she calls the just about managing. Not the poorest of the poor, but not really affluent. People who are maybe okay, but it's a bit of a struggle. What was in the manifesto for them?
Well, that's a very good question. It's something puzzling about the highest profile items in the manifesto. She has said she doesn't want to help those, she wants to help those just above the poorest level. But if you look at the winter fuel allowance, it looks as if that's going to be sort of brought back and is only going to be given to the poorest. If you look at free school meals for infants, free school meals for the poorest are going to be kept, but free school meals for 5, 6, 7-year-olds are going to go. Even the social care plan, those who are renting or in properties worth 70, 80, 90 will not have to pay a penny if they go into care homes or indeed are treated at home. But those above that level in properties worth 250, 350,000 might have to pay, which leads to the question, quite what is being done for just about managings. Now, there is going to be some light tax relief for them. They are going to increase the personal allowance in the way that that George Osborne, David Cameron promised in 2015. But they're not making a great deal of that because they can't say by how much. So in the end, you're looking at the prospect of more tax rises on the just about managings and not many things to explicitly help
Where would
them.
the tax rises come from?
Well, we don't know, but we do know that the Institute for Fiscal Studies says that there is a £40 billion gap in order for the Conservative Party to achieve their 2025 fiscal target that's in this manifesto. So we don't know yet how that money's going to be made up, more cuts, more taxes, more borrowing, or more tax. So that is the challenge ahead, and that's why a lot of the questions about, the implications of removing the tax lock are so potentially difficult for Tory MPs.
The Labour manifesto gives figures for the cost of certain policies and where the revenue will come from. Now, you can have quite a lot of argument about the figures, but at least we have the figures to argue about. The Tory manifesto is quite opaque on these matters.
Well, that problem it applies to both the manifestos. Looking at the Labour manifesto on the way here this morning, and when you look at the section on care for the elderly, for example, they simply say there are various ways in which the monies for this can be raised. But you're
right.
But
on other things that are quite specific.
They are, and we heard John McDonnell this morning being very robust on that and saying there's not a single pound sign in the Tory manifesto. But I don't think...
There are, though. I think being a geek...
I've only got to page 66, so maybe there's some
£23
towards the end. But you're right, it's quite broad brush, and, they are very open to challenge.
28,
for example,
I'm told.
On the detail of a number of their flagship things, look at the detail of their immigration policy. There is none. Once again, they reiterate the ambition to bring it down. How are they going to do that without a massive increase in resources for borders officials?
We're at a time where, certainly for the rest of this year, average wages are struggling to keep pace with prices. Indeed, they're lagging behind. And in-work benefits remain frozen. And I would have thought that the just about managing are probably people who are in work, but they needed some in-work benefits to make life tolerable, bearable, to be able to pay the bills. Doesn't she have to do more for them?
Maybe, but I think in a way this whole manifesto was her inner circle saying, right, this is our chance to express our... So it partly reads almost like a sort of philosophical essay at times about the role of the state, the challenges, individualism versus collectivism, and some of it reads quite well and is quite interesting. But in terms of its detail, Labour would never get away with it. They wouldn't be allowed to be so vague about where taxes are going to rise. We know there are going to be tax rises after the election. We don't know where they will be.
You think they will? Whoever wins is going to be tax rises?
100% there are going to be tax rises. We know Philip Hammond wanted a tax rise in his last budget. He just couldn't get it through because of the 2015 manifesto.
That was on the national insurance.
National insurance. So there are going to be tax rises. And as I say, Labour do offer a lot more detail. People could disagree with it, but there is a lot more detail
There's
about
more to get your
capital
teeth into,
gains
isn't there?
tax, the rises for better off earners and so on.
All right. We've got the SNP manifesto coming out this coming week, the Greens, Sinn Féin, and we think UKIP. We're not quite sure yet. So there are more manifestos to come. The Liberal Democrats have already brought out theirs. Is the Liberal Democrat campaign in some trouble?
Well, it doesn't seem to be doing particularly well in the polls. It didn't seem to be doing particularly well at the local elections a few weeks ago. Look, the Liberal Democrats are trying to fish in quite a small pool for votes. They are looking to get votes from those Remainers who want to reverse the result. In effect, Tim Farron is promising a second referendum on the deal at the end of the whole of the negotiation process.
So that
that's
48%
that
that voted for Remain on June the 23rd are not all low-hanging fruit by any means.
No, polling suggests that about half of those, maybe even slightly less, want to maybe think about reversing the result, but no more than that. So that sets a ceiling of about, I don't know, 20% on the Lib Dem votes. They're getting about half or slightly less than that at the moment. That's not a huge amount, but there aren't a huge amount of votes for them to get on that strategy. But there's another point as well, which it doesn't feel like the Lib Dem campaign with Tim Farron in charge has been the greatest, most serious thing that we have seen, with promises of £1 billion raised from cannabis tax, launched in a nightclub. You know, they are making a very serious case, but the optics of what they've spent their time discussing don't make them look like an anchor in the future coalition government, I would suppose, that they would need to be.
I wonder if we're seeing, in some ways, the re-emergence of a two-party system. And it's not the same two parties. For example, in Scotland, the dynamics of this election seem to be the Nationalists versus the Conservatives. In England, if you look at what's happened to the UKIP vote and what Sam was saying about the Lib Dems struggling a little bit, perhaps, to get some traction, it's overwhelmingly Labour Conservative. A different two-party system from Scotland, but a two-party system.
Yeah, we talked about this a little last week, and there are a number of different general elections going on here in parallel. As you say, in Scotland, it's about whether you're unionist or not. And here we have the collapse of the UKIP vote, which is looks as if it's largely being redistributed in the Tories' favour. But, I mean, this is a unique election. I wouldn't say it will necessarily set the trends for elections to come. One of the things I spotted in the Tory manifesto, looking at it again today, was the fact that the Fixed-Term Parliament Act is going to be scrapped.
That got almost no coverage. It didn't turn out to be what the paper it was written on, did it?
It turned out to be academic anyway, but it tells you something about how Theresa May is feeling, and that she wants to have the control to be able to call an election whenever it suits her.
Re-emergence of the two-party system, at least for this election, if not beyond?
For this election, yes, although in terms of votes, I think some of the smaller parties will do a bit better than they have in the past. But it shows, I think, the sort of robust strength of parties and their fragility. In other words, the Lib Dems haven't really recovered from the losses in the last general election and are therefore not really seen as a robust vehicle to deliver Remain. If they were, they might be doing better. The Labour Party hasn't recovered in Scotland. They've collapsed there. And yet, you look at the basic divide in England and Scotland, and you see two parties battling it out. And it's very, very hard for these smaller parties to break through and last. And many of them sort of appear briefly on the political stage and then disappear again.
Now, the election, Isabel, was ostensibly called because of Brexit. But we haven't heard that much about Brexit in the campaign, have we? Except that perhaps the Tories want to bring it back on to that. David Davis sounding quite tough this morning, the Brexit minister, about there's no chance we'll talk about 100 billion. And we also have to have parallel negotiations on the free trade deal or wherever it is, as well as talking about any kind of bill.
I think they're quite keen to get the subject off the manifesto at this point, because it hasn't started out too well. And there is an irony there, as you say, that Theresa May ostensibly called this election saying she needed a stronger hand for the Brexit negotiations. And there was the opportunity that Sam refers to for the Liberal Democrats, with their unique offer of being the party that is absolutely against the outcome of the referendum and offering another chance. And there hasn't been much airtime for that on that particular particular pledge because instead this election has segued into being all about leadership, and Theresa May's leadership. And looking again at the Tory manifesto, I was struck that she kept saying, this is my plan for our future. Not this is our plan, but this is my plan.
And you had David Gauke, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Even when I'm asking him about social care, he manages to work in a bit about Mrs May and Brexit and leadership.
Well, even Boris Johnson this morning, I thought that the interview that he gave on one of the other political programmes this morning was extraordinarily sycophantic for Boris. It was just, isn't Theresa wonderful? There speaks a man trying to secure his job in the Foreign Office.
Will he succeed?
Well, I don't know for sure, but I would have thought she would leave him.
Yeah, better in the tent than out the tent.
Always better in the tent.
To do that. What did you make of David Davis's remarks?
Well, look, David Davis was basically saying, we'll walk away from the negotiating table and not even try and have a deal if the Europeans slam a bill for 100 billion euros as
100,000 we might pay.
We might pay that.
As a country.
But the point is that the Europeans are not going to slam a bill for 100 billion euros on the negotiating table. That is the, as it were, gross figure. There are all sorts of things that need to be taken into account. I'd expect the maximum figure that they ask for ending up somewhere around the 50-60 billion pound mark. And what's interesting is David Davis is trying to sort of push the limits of what might be expected, so it looks in some way to be a concession when it comes to when they do actually make their demands, in order to sort of soften the ground for what's going to happen just 2 weeks after General Election Day. He makes a perfectly reasonable point about having parallel talks. What the Europeans want to do straight away is deal with the bill and deal with Northern Ireland and deal with citizens' rights. But all of those things are very complicated, interlinked issues that can't, as far as I can tell, be dealt with in isolation. So I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up with parallel talks just in order to work out where we're going to on, for instance, citizens' rights in Northern Ireland and the border much earlier than many people recognise.
That's a fair point. So, not Steve, you can't work out what the Northern Ireland border will be, EU citizens' rights here, until you've broadly determined what our future relationship with the EU will be.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, I know that the British government is under huge pressure to deal quickly with the border issue in Ireland, but feel that it can't do so because the outcome of whether you've got a tariff-free arrangement or an arrangement which is much more protectionist will determine partly the nature of the border. So you can't do a very quick agreement on that front without knowing the rest of the deal. I think this negotiation will be complex. I'm certain they want a deal rather than no deal. This no deal thing is partly the sort of negotiating machismo at this early stage, and sort of sounding tough in the general election campaign also works electorally. But after the election, it's going to be a tough negotiation, and beginning with this cost of Brexit.
Well, my understanding is that the government has come to the conclusion it's got to make the Europeans think that they won't do a deal in order to get a deal.
They don't want no deal. They don't want no deal. So, absolutely.
And of course it plays in the election, as you said. I'm sure the rhetoric will all change once this election's out the way. Who would have thought that?
I've been getting away with it all my